Hey, how's it going, friends? Thank you for tuning in to VR Revelations. Welcome once again. I would appreciate it if you give this video a like and if you subscribe for future content. I know it's been a couple of days since I've uploaded a video, but I have been busy, so I thank you for your patience. But anyways, it is March 21st, the year of our Lord 2023, and we have some interesting comments here by President of Russia, Vladimir Putin. Of course, he just met with the President of China, President Xi, and this has caused a lot of concern in Western countries. Of course, China is a major player on the world stage, and the fact that they are growing ever closer with Russia is definitely very threatening to the United States, to the United Nations, but I would say it's inevitable. And so it looks like the UK is apparently planning on supplying Ukraine with depleted uranium shells. Now, we're going to be taking a look or a read here at this CBS News article, which is going to explain a little bit more about these depleted uranium shells and why they are such a concern to Russia, and why Vladimir Putin has essentially threatened to escalate the conflict even more if the UK does send these depleted uranium shells to Ukraine. Essentially, these shells will make it easier to destroy tanks and other equipment, and so Vladimir Putin has warned the UK that this will cause a escalation, right? It will make Russia react accordingly. But anyways, let's go ahead and take a read at the article. Now, of course, this is a Western news source, so, take everything you read here with a grain of salt. Of course, there's propaganda on both sides, but we all know how these Western news sources tend to portray everything in a positive light for Ukraine, when, as a matter of fact, even though they claim that the Ukrainian army is killing a lot of Russians, the Russians are winning the war. So, it says here, Russian President Vladimir Putin said Tuesday that Moscow would respond accordingly if Britain gives Ukraine military supplies, including armor-piercing ammunition containing depleted uranium. Now, pay close attention to what the UK is saying and one of these so-called experts. The UK announced not only the supply of tanks to Ukraine, but also shells with depleted uranium. Putin told reporters after talks at the Kremlin with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, "I would like to note that if all this happens, then Russia will have to respond accordingly. The collective West is already starting to use weapons with a nuclear component." Now that's the key phrase right here, guys. Nuclear component. Putin was reacting to a written response by a UK Defense Minister, Annabel Goldie, who was asked whether any of the ammunition currently being supplied to Ukraine contains depleted uranium. She responded on Monday that alongside our granting of a squadron of Challenger 2 main battle tanks to Ukraine, we will be providing ammunition, including armor-piercing rounds, which contain depleted uranium. She said the rounds are highly effective in defeating modern tanks and armored vehicles. Depleted uranium is a byproduct. Now, this is where I want to focus on. Depleted uranium is a byproduct of the nuclear enrichment process. So the way you attain depleted uranium is through the nuclear process, used to make nuclear fuel or nuclear weapons. So if Ukraine receives these depleted uranium shells, they are receiving shells that were made via the nuclear process. They literally just stated that right there. It is around 60% as radioactive as natural uranium, and its heaviness lends itself for use in armor-piercing rounds. since it helps them easily penetrate steel. So these are very effective at penetrating through the tanks. Hamish the Breton Gordon, here's where the nonsense comes in. A chemical weapons expert and former British Army officer said Putin's comments accusing the West of supplying Ukraine with weapons with a nuclear component were absolutely bonkers and completely wrong, noting that depleted uranium cannot be used as nuclear fuel or turned into a nuclear weapon. Now here's where they twist what Vladimir Putin actually said. Putin never said that he's concerned that Ukraine is going to receive nuclear weapons or that depleted uranium is going to turn into a nuclear weapon. He said that there would be consequences for providing Ukraine with something that comes via the nuclear process. So this is what this guy is saying here, this former British officer, is completely missing the point here, right? They're trying to twist Vladimir Putin's words or concerns. Noting that depleted uranium cannot be used as nuclear fuel or turned into a nuclear weapon, he said Putin is trying to persuade Xi to give him weapons and to terrify people in the West that he is planning to escalate to nuclear weapons. Now, of course, this is just British propaganda, right? The United Nations Environment Program has described depleted uranium, this is the United Nations here, warning about depleted uranium, as a chemical and radiologically toxic heavy metal. Depleted uranium munitions were used in conflicts in the former Yugoslavia and Iraq. Remember Iraq, guys? George Bush, when he was trying to criticize Russia's invasion of Ukraine, accidentally said, we cannot stand for this unholy and ungodly and evil war in Iraq. He literally accidentally said Iraq, and then right after he laughed about it and said, well, that too. So there's the hypocrisy, right? And were suspected of being a possible cause of Gulf War syndrome, a collection of debilitating symptoms suffered by veterans of the 1990-91 war. So even though these veterans here during the Gulf War suffered from symptoms because of these depleted uranium shells, the UK is not going to talk about that, right? Because, they want to keep this hidden, right? Since they're trying to supply Ukraine with these weapons because, again, Ukraine is losing the conflict. But anytime they up the ante, anytime they try to escalate, Russia has better weapons. Like I've said before, and, people might not want to accept this, Russia could end the war right now. They have the superior weapons. They have nuclear weapons. They could have destroyed Ukraine in the blink of an eye if they chose to. And the U.S. would not have come in to the rescue because they are not willing to risk their country, their beloved country, for Ukraine. But Russia isn't trying to go all in like that. They have been very measured, and the U.S. and the Western propaganda has been taking advantage of those restraints by Russia to, poke fun at them and try to paint this picture that Russia is highly inefficient, that they can't overcome Ukraine, while at the same time supplying Ukraine with weapons and really being the only reason why Ukraine is still standing, which it barely is. Researchers from the UK's University of Portsmouth tested sufferers to examine levels of residual depleted uranium in their bodies and say their 2021 study conclusively proved that none of them were exposed to significant amounts of depleted uranium. Right, that's quite convenient. Anti-nuclear organization CND condemned the decision to send the ammunition to Ukraine, calling it an additional environmental and health disaster for those living through the conflict, as toxic or radioactive dust can be released on impact. CND has repeatedly called for the UK government to place an immediate moratorium on the use of depleted uranium weapons and to fund long-term studies into their health and environmental impacts, said CND General Secretary Kate Hudson. So, there you have it, guys. The UK and the Western nations are trying to do everything they can to inflict as much damage on Russia, because Ukraine is losing the war, and they're going to lose it completely pretty soon. I believe we will have a conclusion to this conflict by this year. And as things grow even more desperate, as the West and the United States continue to be embarrassed on the national stage with its economy collapsing, with bank failures, with everything pretty much going the wrong way, and as we see Russia being strengthening its ties with China, who's supposed to be the main enemy of the U.S., things are just looking absolutely catastrophic for the United States and the UK, and pretty much for all the nations that are part of the Western system. And so, they are at their wits' end, but they're not going to push the red button. They're not going to launch nuclear weapons over Ukraine. They might take measures like this, as a desperate measure, and send depleted uranium weapons. They might even send jets, fighter jets, better missiles. But again, Russia has better weapons. And ultimately, it would end up with a nuclear conflict, right? If you really want to win the war, you use nuclear weapons. But again, we're talking about mutually assured destruction. And personally, now this is personally, I do believe we will have a nuclear conflict. As I've said before, according to biblical prophecy, there will be an end to this planet by fire. And I think that, we're going to take part in that prophecy. And so we are going to destroy ourselves. Of course, there will be a divine element to that destruction, to that judgment. But I don't think it's going to take place over Ukraine, because I don't think the United States is foolish enough, and really they're just not willing to die for a Ukrainian people, but they are willing to push things as far as they can, possibly even to force Russia to use a small tactical nuke in Ukraine, to sort of create a shock around the world. But I don't think, even if it reached that point, it would have the intended consequences. I don't think China and all these other countries that support Russia would turn away from Russia if they used nuclear weapons. So pretty much all of the decisions that the U.S. is making and their leaders are absolute rubbish, are absolutely foolish, right? No right person, or no person in their right mind would try and escalate this conflict against a nuclear superpower. We're talking about World War III and a world-ending event. But again, I think there is a divine element, and I think that is actually the area where we should focus. I think that these things are taking place in order to lead us into biblical prophecies, in order that they are fulfilled. Again, I've talked about the New World Order. Many people who don't believe in the Bible are aware of this, right? They talk about the Great Reset, a new world order, a new economic system. And all of those things, the truth of those things are found in the scriptures, I believe. But again, people don't acknowledge the scriptures, so they tend to look at things politically. They get caught up in this political battle, these ideologies of West versus the East, of democracy versus, communism and dictatorships. And so they're unaware of the spiritual element, but I think that all of this is a precursor to those biblical prophecies, to the New World Order, and eventually to a world-ending event via nuclear weapons. Again, I've said before, the only difference between our day and age, as opposed to any other time in human recorded history, is that now, in our day of technology, we actually have the capability of fulfilling those prophecies. And so I think that is a sign of the times in which we are living in. And I believe that the reason that these Western leaders continue to foolishly ignore what Russia is warning is because, these things have to be so. Again, remember, friends, as I always say, the truth is stranger than fiction. And so I believe the UK will probably send these depleted uranium shells to Ukraine, and I think Russia will respond accordingly, and I think they are just really precipitating the inevitable collapse of Ukraine. But yeah, that's going to be it for this video, guys. Let me know your thoughts and comments down below. Again, make sure you give this video a like and make sure you subscribe for future content. Thank you for tuning in. Have a wonderful day, and God bless.